Imagine the sun rising over the ancient city of Jezreel.
Yeah.
The dawn light hits the heavy stone of the city gate, which is, the bustling center of commerce and justice in the ancient Near East.
Right, the absolute hub of the city.
Exactly. But the merchants and the elders, they aren't gathering for trade or court this morning.
No, definitely not.
They are frozen,
Yeah.
just staring in absolute suffocating horror at what has been left at the entrance.
It's just a brutal scene.
2 massive, towering heaps of human heads, 70 of them.
Wow.
The severed heads of the entire royal future of the nation, just piled up like grim trophies of war.
Yeah.
And the man who ordered this, the man who will step out in front of the terrified crowd and claim this as an act of profound religious devotion, is King Jehu.
It is a truly staggering visual. I mean, we often sanitize ancient texts, right? We turn them into polite moral fables.
You really do. We make them Sunday school stories.
Exactly. But the historical reality of the ancient Near East is it's visceral.
Yeah.
What you are describing isn't a scene from a fictional horror story.
Right.
It is a calculated, devastating political reality. It is the anatomy of a regime change written entirely in blood.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a story that reads like a high-stakes psychological thriller today.
It really does.
Complete with bloody coups, masterful deception, and, honestly, a haunting theological paradox. Our mission today is to unpack an incredibly intense piece of source material.
Which is 2 Kings chapter 10 from the King James Version, right?
That's the one. It chronicles the violent, furious rise of King Jehu. But I want to be clear to you, the listener, this isn't just some distant historical chronicle.
No, not at all.
We are looking at the terrifying consequences of using divine mandates to serve, personal ambitions.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
We're examining the extreme danger of political compromise, and we're pulling back the curtain on the unseen spiritual battles that shape the destinies of entire nations.
And that is the crucial lens for this deep dive. I mean, the story of Jehu forces us to really grapple with the concept of partial obedience.
Oh, man.
It demands that we ask, what happens when a leader or a nation or even an individual zealously destroys the obvious, horrific evils in their culture?
But fiercely protects the comfortable, profitable sin.
Exactly. It is a mirror held up to the human heart. It shows us how easily zeal can be completely hijacked by ambition.
Okay, let's unpack this before we get into the psychology of those 70 severed heads and before we get to the massive temple desecrations.
We have to set the historical chessboard.
Right, because you simply cannot understand the sheer violence of Jehu without understanding the tangled, toxic geopolitical web he was operating in.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to the fracture of the kingdom.
Right. So to understand the political powder keg of 2 Kings 10, we have to rewind about 90 years.
So roughly 930 BC, right?
Yep, 930 BC. King Solomon has just died, and his vast, wealthy, united empire just completely shatters.
It falls apart.
Totally falls apart. The 12 tribes of Israel suffer a catastrophic civil war, and they split into 2 permanently rival states.
And this creates a geopolitical fault line that basically defines the entire landscape of the Old Testament moving forward.
It does. It shapes everything.
So we have the North and the South.
Yeah.
And they go by several different names in our sources, which honestly can get pretty confusing if you aren't paying close attention.
Precisely. Let's look at the Northern Kingdom first. In historical and biblical texts, it is called Israel.
Okay, Israel.
But it's also frequently referred to as Ephraim, because Ephraim was the largest and most dominant of the 10 tribes that formed this northern coalition.
Got it.
And later on, it's referred to simply by the name of its capital city, Samaria. Sometimes the prophets even call it the House of Joseph.
So Israel, Ephraim, Samaria, House of Joseph, all the north. And what's the defining characteristic of this northern kingdom?
Oh, it's chronic, violent instability and, systemic state-sponsored idolatry.
A great combination.
Right. The Northern Kingdom was founded by a man named Jeroboam I.
Yeah.
And from day one, it operated under a curse of its own making.
Because it had no stable, lasting dynasty.
Right. Exactly. It was just a revolving door of military coups, assassinations, and usurpers. It was chaos.
And then there's the southern kingdom.
Yes. The south is the kingdom of Judah. It consists primarily of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin.
Okay.
And it's referred to as Jerusalem or Zion or the House of David.
And that last name is the key, isn't it? The House of David.
It is the absolute key. Because unlike the chaotic north, the south was ruled exclusively by one continuous bloodline.
The descendants of King David.
Right. They maintained the original temple in Jerusalem. They had the legitimate priesthood. And most importantly, they had the covenant promise that a messianic king would eventually emerge from their line.
Okay, so you have this stark contrast.
Yeah.
The north is this chaotic, idolatrous military state. The south is the stable, legitimate Davidic monarchy.
On paper, yes.
All right, on paper. Because by the time we reach our source material today, the south has been horribly compromised. The Davidic line has been infected.
It really has.
And this is where the politics get incredibly dark.
What's fascinating here is how that infection actually happened. I mean, it wasn't through a military invasion.
It was a treaty, wasn't it?
It was. It was a marriage treaty. So the most powerful dynasty in the history of the Northern Kingdom was the Omride dynasty.
This is King Ahab, right?
Yes, specifically King Ahab and his Phoenician queen, Jezebel. Now, Ahab and Jezebel didn't just practice casual, quiet idolatry.
No, they were aggressive with it.
Extremely aggressive. They imported and fiercely enforced the worship of Baal, which was a Canaanite storm and fertility god. They actively slaughtered the prophets of Yahweh.
It was a full-blown religious purge. And to secure peace between the two rival kingdoms, the South does the unthinkable.
They do.
They agree to a royal marriage. It's like a messy corporate split.
Yeah.
Where one side, the North, keeps violently changing CEOs.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
While the other side, the South, keeps the founder's family but gets corrupted by a completely toxic merger.
That is the perfect analogy. The king of Judah in the south marries a woman named Athaliah, and she is the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel.
Wow. Talk about a toxic merger.
It is the ultimate toxic merger. Through Athaliah, the aggressive, violent Baal cult of the north literally crosses the border and walks right into the throne room of Jerusalem.
So House of David becomes dangerously, genetically entwined with the wicked House of Ahab.
Exactly. The spiritual rot of the north is now threatening to completely consume the messianic line in the south. It's a crisis.
I want you to keep this royal bloodline virus in mind. The two kingdoms are politically separate, but they're now tied together by blood, by marriage, and by this deeply corrupting religious system.
The entire region is spiritually hemorrhaging.
Right. And to stop this bleeding, God takes drastic action. He commissions the prophet Elisha to secretly anoint a furious, hard-driving military commander named Jehu.
Yeah, Jehu.
So Jehu's divine mandate is absolute. He is to be a human sword. He is commanded to completely wipe out the house of Ahab and eradicate the Baal cult.
And Jehu wastes zero time, and he immediately launches a coup.
He just goes for it.
He rides to the city of Jezreel and publicly assassinates Joram, the king of Israel, by literally shooting him through the heart with an arrow.
Brutal.
Very brutal. He then orders Queen Jezebel to be thrown from a high window to her death. But, and this is where chapter 10 actually begins, assassinating the current monarch doesn't secure the throne.
Right, because Ahab has an entire dynasty waiting in the wings. Our text says Ahab has 70 sons living in Samaria.
70 sons.
I want to pause here because 70 sons sounds like an impossible exaggeration to a modern ear.
It does.
How does one king have 70 sons, and why are they all holed up in Samaria?
Well, when the text says sons, it's using the ancient Hebrew concept of descendants. So this includes immediate sons, grandsons, and royal nephews.
Oh, I see. So it's the whole extended family.
It represents the entire male dynastic line. And the reason there are so many is due to the ancient Near Eastern practice of royal harems.
Right, political marriages.
Exactly. Kings cemented political alliances with surrounding nations and with powerful domestic families by marrying their daughters. So a massive harem produced a massive number of heirs.
Which served as the ultimate political insurance policy.
Precisely.
So if you kill the king, you still have 70 legitimate heirs who can rally an army and take the throne back, and they are all safely tucked away in Samaria.
And Samaria was not an easy target.
No.
Not at all.
Right.
It was the heavily fortified capital of the northern kingdom. It was built by Ahab's father, Omri, on a steep, isolated hill.
So it was highly defensible.
Very. In ancient warfare, taking a walled city situated on a high elevation required a massive, prolonged, agonizing siege. It could take months, even years, to starve them out.
And Jehu doesn't have months. He just triggered a coup. He needs to consolidate power immediately before a counter-revolution can organize against him.
He's on a ticking clock.
Exactly. So what does he do? He doesn't march his army against those towering walls. He sits down and he writes a letter.
Yeah.
And this is an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare.
It truly is. It's brilliant. Jehu sends letters to the rulers of Jezreel, to the elders, and to the guardians.
The guardians being the folks raising the kids.
Right, the elite nobles who were specifically tasked with raising and protecting Ahab's descendants. And Jehu's letter says, in essence, as soon as you read this, seeing that you have your master's sons with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city, and armor.
He's lifting their assets.
He is. He says, pick the absolute best and most capable of your master's sons, put him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house.
I'm reading this, and it is just dripping with dark sarcasm.
Oh, absolutely.
He is actively taunting the political elite of the capital. He's reminding them of their tactical advantages. He's like, you have the walls, you have the weapons, you have the royal bloodline, so pick your champion, come out of your fortress, and let's go to war.
Yeah.
But the psychological weight of this challenge is absolutely crushing to them. Why is that?
Because Jehu is forcing the leaders of Samaria to evaluate their actual courage versus their theoretical loyalty.
Oh, wow. He's calling their bluff.
He is completely calling their bluff, and the text reveals their internal calculus. They are, quote, exceedingly afraid. They look at the situation with cold, hard, pragmatic logic.
Right, they do the math.
They do the math. Jehu has just killed 2 anointed kings in a single day, King Joram of the north and King Ahaziah of the south, who just happened to be visiting Jezreel.
Right, they say, if 2 kings couldn't stand before him, how can we?
Exactly. The guardians and elders realize that while they might have walls, Jehu has momentum. He has military backing, and he has a terrifying reputation for violence.
So they fold.
They decide that loyalty to a dead regime isn't worth their own lives. So they immediately fold. They send a message back to Jehu, offering unconditional surrender. They say, we are your servants. We will do whatever you say. We will not make any man king.
They surrender without a single arrow being fired. It's a totally bloodless victory.
Initially, yes.
But Jehu doesn't stop there. He doesn't just say, great, open the gates, I'm coming in to take the throne. He writes a second letter.
He does.
And this is where the sheer calculating brutality of Jehu really shows itself. He tells them, if you are mine, and if you will hearken to my voice, take the heads of the men, your master's sons, and bring them to me at Jezreel by tomorrow at this time.
This is where Jehu moves from psychological intimidation to inescapable political engineering.
But I'm pushing back on this slightly, though. Why doesn't Jehu just march in and execute the heirs himself?
That's a great question.
He has their surrender, the gates are open. Why force the guardians to do the dirty work?
Because Jehu understands the mechanics of long-term political survival. Think about it. If Jehu rides into Samaria and slaughters the 70 princes himself, what happens a year from now or 5 years from now?
The people might turn on him.
The elders of Samaria, the nobles, the guardians, they might secretly harbor resentment. They might eventually rally a rebellion, claiming they were always loyal to the memory of Ahab and that Jehu is an illegitimate butcher.
Ah, but if they are the ones holding the swords...
Precisely. By forcing the city leaders to physically behead the royal family, the very boys they raised, educated, and swore to protect, Jehu creates absolute, inescapable complicity.
He's burning their bridges for them.
He is. Their hands are now entirely soaked in the blood of Ahab's house. They can never, ever lead a popular uprising against Jehu in the name of Ahab because the populace knows they are the executioners. Jehu binds them to his new regime through shared guilt.
It is terrifyingly effective. The text says the leaders of Samaria take the 70 princes, slaughter them, put their severed heads in baskets, and ship them to Jehu in Jezreel.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to that chilling scene we started with. Jehu orders his men to take these 70 heads and pile them into 2 massive heaps at the entering in of the city gate, leaving them there until morning.
And we really have to understand the sociology of the city gate in the ancient world to get the impact of this.
Right. It wasn't just a door.
No, the gate wasn't just a point of entry. It was the civic center. It was where the judges sat to decide legal disputes. It was the primary marketplace. It was where the elders gathered.
So it's the most public place possible.
Exactly. By placing 2 mountains of severed heads at the gate, Jehu is making a profound public statement of total, uncontested victory. Every merchant, every citizen, every traveler entering the city must walk past the physical proof that the Amrite dynasty is completely extinct.
But look at how Jehu spins this the next morning.
Yeah, this is wild.
He steps out, stands before the terrified populace, and addresses them. He says, "You are righteous. Behold, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these?"
It is an incredible piece of political theater.
He's deflecting. He is essentially saying to the crowd, hey, I admit I killed King Joram. That's on me. But look at this pile of heads. I didn't do this. The elite leaders of Samaria did this. The whole system is turning against Ahab.
He deflects the immediate horror of the massacre while simultaneously claiming absolute divine backing for the outcome.
He pivots right to the theology.
He pivots immediately. He tells the crowd, "Know now that there shall fall into the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spake concerning the house of Ahab. For the Lord hath done that which he spake by his servant Elijah."
He frames the entire massacre not as a self-serving political consolidation, but as the precise, inevitable fulfillment of divine prophecy.
And strictly speaking, he isn't wrong about the prophecy. Decades earlier, after Ahab and Jezebel murdered an innocent man named Naboth to steal his vineyard, the prophet Elijah pronounced total doom on their house.
Right.
Jehu is wielding that prophecy to legitimize his violence. He wants the people to see him not as a usurper, but as the righteous instrument of God's delayed justice.
So Jehu secures his power base in the north. Ahab's bloodline in Israel is gone. The capital city of Samaria has submitted. You would think the purge is over.
You would think so?
But while the blood is practically still drying in Jezreel, Jehu is already on the move south towards Samaria. And on the road, we encounter a moment of severe collateral damage that makes you start to question Jehu's true motives.
Yes. The narrative shifts to a location called Bethel, which translates to the shearing house. Jehu is traveling with his entourage, and he suddenly runs into a group of 42 men.
Jehu stops them and asks a very simple, dangerous question. He says, "Who are you?" And their answer seals their fate. They reply, "We are the brethren of Ahaziah."
Now let's connect the dots here. Ahaziah was the king of Judah, the southern kingdom.
Right.
He was the king who had been visiting Jezreel and was killed by Jehu on the very first day of the coup. When these 42 men say they are the brethren of Ahaziah, they are identifying themselves as Judean royalty. They are members of the Davidic line from Jerusalem.
And they are completely, fatally oblivious to what is happening.
Completely oblivious.
They tell Jehu they are traveling down to salute the children of the king and the queen. They are going to visit the royal court, utterly unaware that the court has been violently overthrown, the king is dead, the queen mother is dead, and the 70 princes have just been decapitated.
It's awful.
It is a tragic case of being in the absolute wrong place at the absolute wrong time.
Jehu doesn't hesitate for a second. He gives a cold, tactical order to his guards. Take them alive. They capture all 42 of these Judean princes, and then they slaughter every single one of them right there at the pit of the shearing house.
I want to focus on the dark irony of this location. We are at a shearing house. What happens at a shearing house?
It's an agricultural center.
Right. It's a time of the spring harvest. Shearing sheep is a time of immense wealth gathering, of community festivity, of gathering wool to make clothing and resources. It's a place of life and provision.
Yeah.
And suddenly, in a matter of moments, this site of celebration is transformed into a mass grave for 42 southern royals.
This raises an important question, and it's one that theologians and biblical historians debate heavily. Is Jehu just following God's orders here, or has his own bloodlust and paranoia completely taken over?
That's exactly what I'm wondering. Because the mandate from God, delivered by the prophets, was to wipe out the house of Ahab. Ahab was the king of the north.
Right.
These 42 men are from the south. They're the house of David. Why is Jehu slaughtering Judean princes?
To answer that, we have to go back to that toxic merger we discussed at the very beginning. Ahaziah's mother was Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab.
Ah, right.
Therefore, from a strictly genealogical standpoint, the blood of Ahab flowed in the veins of these Judean princes. The spiritual and genetic infection of the north had spread to them.
So Jehu could theoretically argue that he is just being incredibly thorough with the divine mandate. He's cutting out every lost trace of the cancer.
He could argue that. However, Elijah's prophecy specifically targeted the northern dynasty. By slaughtering the royal family of the south, Jehu's purge is starting to look less like precise divine surgery and much more like a massive, opportunistic, geopolitical power grab.
He's making sure there is no retaliation from Jerusalem.
Exactly. He is securing his southern border. Jehu knows that if he leaves 42 Judean royals alive who are closely related to the northern dynasty he just annihilated, they will eventually rally the armies of Judah and march north for revenge.
So it's preemptive.
Very preemptive. He is eliminating anyone with the motive, the resources, or even a tangential claim to power. We are starting to see Jehu's unchecked political ambition bleeding heavily into his divine mandate. He is a zealot, and the terrifying thing about zealots is that they rarely know when to sheathe the sword.
Okay, so let's assess the situation. Jehu has a pile of 70 heads at the gates of Jezreel. He has a mass grave of 42 Judean princes at the shearing house. His hands are completely soaked in blood.
Yeah, he's a busy guy.
And he is still on his way to take control of the capital city. He is a man who just violently seized the throne, and he needs the populace to accept him. And right on cue, he orchestrates what I can only describe as an ancient, brilliant, political PR stunt.
This is where we meet a man named Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. Jehu is riding his chariot, and he deliberately goes out to meet this specific individual.
Who is Jehonadab, and why does Jehu care about him? Why stop a military convoy for one guy?
To understand Jehonadab, you really have to understand the group he founded known as the Rechabites. We actually get a deep sociological profile of them centuries later in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 35.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Rechabites were radical, nomadic traditionalists. They took a vow never to drink wine, never to plant vineyards, never to sow seed, and never to build permanent houses. They lived strictly in tents.
Wait, why? That sounds like extreme asceticism. Were they just trying to be miserable?
Not at all. It was a deliberate, living protest against the culture.
A protest.
Yes. When the Israelites entered the Promised Land, they transitioned from nomadic shepherds into settled, urbanized farmers. And with that urbanization came the temptation of the Canaanite lifestyle, specifically the worship of Baal, the god of agriculture and rain.
So they saw farming as the gateway to idolatry.
Exactly. The Rechabites believed that settled urban life inevitably led to spiritual compromise and idolatry. So they rejected the culture entirely. They represented strict, unbending purity and fierce, ancient devotion to Yahweh.
Okay, so they are the ultimate, unimpeachable religious conservatives of their day. They are the people everyone in Israel looks at and says, well, we might be compromised, but those guys are truly holy.
Exactly.
It's like a highly controversial modern politician, someone who has just done some very shady, ruthless things to gain power.
Yes.
And they make absolutely sure they are photographed smiling alongside a universally respected, completely scandal-free religious leader. Jehu wants the optics.
That is the perfect analogy. Jehu meets Jehonadab and asks him a pointed question. Is thine heart right, as my heart is with thy heart?
He's asking for an endorsement.
He is asking for an alliance. Jehonadab, seeing that Jehu is actively destroying the Baal-worshipping Omride dynasty, agrees. He says, it is.
And Jehu's response is incredibly revealing. He says, give me thine hand. He pulls this revered ascetic up into his royal blood-spattered chariot, and he says, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord.
Notice the phrasing there. He doesn't say, come see God's justice. He says, come see my zeal.
Wow.
Jehu knows his hands are incredibly dirty. He needs the populace of Samaria to view his actions not as a self-seething massacre, but as a righteous, holy crusade. Riding into the capital city with Jehonadab in the passenger seat grants Jehu instant, unquestionable religious legitimacy in the eyes of the common people.
He craves an audience for his zeal. He wants his violence validated.
He definitely does.
And what an audience he gathers next. Jehu rides into Samaria, heavily armed with his newfound religious endorsement, and he decides it is time to deal with the spiritual rot of the nation.
This is a wild turn of events.
This brings us to a sequence that I call the Red Wedding of Samaria. It is one of the most audacious, deceptive, and brutal stratagems in ancient military history.
The target is Baal worship. Now, we need to pause and understand why Baal was such a massive threat to Israel. Baal wasn't just a casual spiritual preference. He wasn't just a statue people bowed to on the weekends.
Right.
Baal was a state-sponsored, deeply entrenched Canaanite fertility and storm cult.
Let's dig into that. Why was it so enticing? Because from a modern perspective, looking back at the horrific practices of Baal worship, which included temple prostitution and even child sacrifice, it's hard to understand why the Israelites would ever abandon the God who parted the Red Sea for a carved pillar.
It comes down to the agrarian reality of ancient survival. The land of Canaan, unlike Egypt with the Nile River, relied entirely on seasonal rainfall.
Okay.
If the rain didn't come, your crops failed. If your crops failed, your livestock died. If your livestock died, your family starved to death. It was a razor-thin margin of survival.
The rain was literally life or death.
Absolutely. And Baal was worshipped as the rider of the clouds, the god who controlled the storms, the lightning, and the rain. When the Israelites settled the land, the Canaanite locals essentially told them, Yahweh might be a great god of war in the desert, but if you want your wheat to grow in this dirt, you need to pay off Baal.
So it was viewed as practical agricultural insurance.
Precisely. It was economic pragmatism that mutated into profound spiritual treason. Jezebel weaponized this fear, aggressively promoting Baal while violently purging the prophets of Yahweh.
Wow.
Baal worship was an existential threat to the covenant between God and Israel. Jehu's divine mandate is to rip this cancer out by the roots.
But he doesn't use military force to do it initially.
Huh?
He uses profound, jaw-dropping deception.
He really does.
He gathers all the people of the capital and makes this shocking public declaration. He says, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu shall serve him much.
Can you imagine the psychological whiplash the people must have felt?
It's insane. Here is the guy who just slaughtered Ahab's entire family, who just rode into town with the most famous anti-Baal conservative in the country.
Yeah.
And he's standing on a podium claiming he is going to be an even more extreme devotee of Ahab's god.
It is the ultimate Trojan horse. Jehu announces a massive, mandatory, solemn assembly for Baal. He summons every single prophet, priest, and worshiper of Baal from every corner of the kingdom.
And he attaches a lethal ultimatum, doesn't he?
He does. He says, "Whosoever shall be wanting, he shall not live."
It's a trap on a national scale. And the bait is so compelling and the threat so severe that it works flawlessly. The text tells us that every worshiper of Baal came. There was not a man left that came not.
They packed the place.
They pack into the massive, sprawling temple of Baal in Samaria, filling it from one end to the other.
And Jehu plays the part of the devout, fanatical king to absolute perfection. He orders the keeper of the wardrobe to bring out the sacred vestments for all the worshippers.
He is literally dressing them for their own execution.
He is. The vestments ensure that in the chaos to come, the soldiers will be able to easily identify every single target.
And he's incredibly meticulous about who gets caught in the net. Before the trap springs, Jehu and Jehonadab walk through the packed temple. They tell the crowd, "Search, and look that there be here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but the worshippers of Baal only."
Jehu spins this as an act of ritual purity. He's telling the Baal worshippers, we can't have any defiling Yahweh worshippers ruining our sacred ceremony.
But in reality, he is ensuring that no innocent bystanders are accidentally caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. Once the crowd is verified, the track is set. Jehu stations 80 heavily armed elite guards outside the heavy doors of the temple, and he gives them a strict, terrifying command.
What does he say?
He tells his captains, if even one Baal worshiper escapes, the guard who let him slip through forfeits his own life.
The tension in the narrative here is incredible. You have to picture the scene inside. The worshippers are gathered, the incense is burning, they are offering massive burnt offerings. They are swept up in religious frenzy, believing the new king is their greatest patron.
Their guard is completely, totally down.
And the exact moment the burnt offering is finished, when the ceremony hits its peak, Jehu drops the mask. He turns to his captains and gives the cold order. Go in and slay them, let none come forth.
It's an absolute bloodbath.
Wait, logistically, how does that even work? How do 80 men slaughter thousands of people in a temple without being overrun by sheer numbers?
It comes down to choke points, weaponry, and panic.
Ah.
The 80 men are heavily armored, professional soldiers wielding iron swords. The thousands inside are unarmed, wearing cumbersome religious robes, and they're packed shoulder to shoulder in an enclosed space.
So they can't maneuver.
Exactly. When the soldiers block the exits and begin the slaughter, the panic within the crowd does half the work. People are trampled. There is no room to fight back and nowhere to run. It is a systematic, inescapable massacre.
The soldiers strike them down with the edge of the sword, and the text says they cast them out, throwing the bodies aside as they push deeper into the inner sanctum of the temple, the city of the house of Baal.
And they don't just kill the personnel. They systematically dismantle the entire religious infrastructure. They drag out the sacred wooden pillars, the images of Asherah, and burn them.
They physically smash the main stone pillar of Baal into pieces. They completely wreck the temple structure itself.
And then they execute the ultimate permanent desecration. They don't just leave the ruins, they intentionally turn the holy site of Baal into a draft house.
They turn it into a public latrine, toilet.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the theological irony here is absolutely staggering. Think about why these people were there. The worshippers of Baal came to this temple to receive life.
Right, they came for rain and fertility.
They came to beg their storm god for fertility, for rain, for protection from death. But in their most desperate moment of terror, screaming inside his very own temple, Baal is exposed as utterly, pathetically impotent.
He is nothing.
He cannot protect his high priests, he cannot protect his devoted worshippers, he cannot even protect his own sacred stone statues from being smashed and turned into a public toilet. It is a violent, definitive, and humiliating demonstration that the idols of the nations are lifeless, deaf, and powerless.
The narrator of the text sums up this monumental event with a single definitive sentence. Thus, Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel.
It sounds like a total resounding victory.
It really does. It sounds like Jehu has finally cleansed the nation. He did it. He wiped out Ahab. He avenged the prophets. He annihilated the Baal cult. But then, right in the very next sentence, we hit a massive theological brick wall.
Oh, yeah.
The text drops one of the most devastating, tragic words in the entire Old Testament, howbeit.
Ugh, the tragic howbeit. The pivot point of Jehu's entire life. The text reads, "Howbeit from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not from after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan."
Okay, we really need to unpack this. I need you to explain this paradox to me. Jehu just risked absolutely everything. He orchestrated a highly dangerous military coup. He alienated foreign allies.
Yeah.
He executed an incredibly risky trap to slaughter the entire Baal establishment. He risked his life, his throne, and his eternal soul to wipe out Baal. Why on earth does he stop short? Why does he keep the golden calves?
What's fascinating here is that to understand Jehu's mindset, we have to meticulously break down the difference between these two forms of idolatry. To a modern reader, an idol is an idol. But to an ancient Israelite king, they were vastly different political tools.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, let's look at Baal worship. As we discussed, Baal was foreign paganism. It was a Phoenician import brought in by Jezebel. It was an explicit, hostile replacement of Yahweh.
Right, it was the religion of the enemy.
Exactly. Politically speaking, Baal worship was intimately tied to the old regime, the house of Ahab. For Jehu, destroying Baal wasn't just an act of religious zeal, it was politically brilliant.
How so?
It was actually popular among the Israelite nationalists and traditionalists, like the Rechabites we talked about, who hated Jezebel's foreign influence. By destroying Baal, Jehu consolidated his own power. He destroyed the cultural foundation of his political rivals.
It served his ambition to destroy it. But the golden calves are a different story, aren't they?
Very different. The golden calf worship wasn't foreign paganism, it was domestic syncretism. We have to go back to the founder of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam I, to understand why they existed.
Yeah.
When Jeroboam split the kingdom decades earlier, he faced a massive existential political crisis. The true temple of Yahweh, the one God commanded them to worship at, was located in Jerusalem.
And Jerusalem was the capital city of his rival, the southern kingdom of Judah.
Right. Jeroboam's citizens had to cross enemy lines just to go to church.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
And Jeroboam knew human nature, he reasoned. If my citizens keep traveling south to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the holy festivals, if they keep offering sacrifices at the Davidic temple, eventually their hearts will return to the house of David.
They'll feel a kinship.
Right. They will realize we are a fractured nation, they will assassinate me, and they will reunite the kingdom. So, to prevent this, Jeroboam created an alternative, counterfeit religious system. He built 2 golden calves.
Where did he put them?
He placed one at the far northern border in a city called Dan, and one at the southern border in a city called Bethel, right on the edge of Judah.
And he presents them to the people, saying, "Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of Egypt."
Now, a crucial piece of ancient iconography here. Jeroboam likely wasn't telling the people that the calf itself was God. In ancient Near Eastern art, deities were often depicted standing invisibly on the backs of animals.
So they were like thrones.
Yes. The golden calf was meant to be a pedestal, a localized throne for Yahweh. Jeroboam was trying to give them a convenient, local way to worship the God of the Exodus.
But doing so explicitly violated the second commandment against making graven images.
Completely. It was gross disobedience disguised as religious convenience.
So bringing this back to Jehu, it's purely political. The golden calves were border control.
Exactly.
They were stationed at the edges of the country to physically and spiritually quarantine the northern Israelites, keeping them from traveling south.
You've hit the nail on the head. Jehu inherits this exact same political anxiety. Jehu just violently slaughtered 42 Judean princes. The South hates him.
They despise him.
If Jehu destroys the golden calves and tells his people, the law of Moses demands you travel to Jerusalem to worship, he risks his citizens reuniting with the surviving house of David. He risks losing his newly acquired blood-soaked throne.
Wow. So Jehu fiercely, violently destroyed what threatened him, the foreign cult of Baal tied to Ahab. but he fiercely, stubbornly protected what served him.
Yep, the domestic idolatry of the golden calves that kept his borders closed and his people under control.
That is profound, and it's deeply tragic. It is the ultimate political compromise. And God acknowledges both sides of Jehu's actions, actually. In the text, God actually commends Jehu for executing justice on Ahab's house.
He does.
God says, "Because you have done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, your children of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel."
And historically they do. The dynasty of Jehu lasts for nearly a century. It becomes the longest-lasting dynasty in the turbulent history of the northern kingdom.
But the very next verse delivers the final, heartbreaking verdict on Jehu's soul. "But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart, for he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel to sin."
Yeah.
He was a reformer, but his heart wasn't transformed. He used God. He didn't submit to him.
And that lack of internal transformation has immediate, devastating geopolitical fallout. Because of this partial obedience, this calculated spiritual compromise, God removes his hand of protection from the nation. The text says, "In those days the Lord began to cut Israel short."
Cut Israel short. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It looks like invasion and territorial collapse. The instrument God uses for this violent pruning is a man named Hazael, the newly crowned king of Syria, also known as Aram Damascus, located to the northeast of Israel.
Hazael is a terrifying figure in biblical history.
He is the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of a nightmare. Interestingly, years earlier, God had commanded the prophet Elijah to anoint Hazael as king over Syria.
Oh, read.
God specifically raised Hazael up to serve as an instrument of divine discipline against an unrepentant Israel. Hazael becomes the scourge of God. While Jehu is sitting on his throne in Samaria congratulating himself on his internal purge, Hazael launches a massive, brutal military campaign against Israel's eastern flank.
The text is very specific about what is lost. Hazael smites all the coasts of Israel, conquering all the Transjordan territories, everything east of the Jordan River. He lists the regions: Gilead, the territories of the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassites, from Aror by the river Arnon, all the way north to Bashan.
We really need to understand the magnitude of this loss. The Transjordan wasn't just empty desert. Bashan was famous throughout the ancient world for its incredibly rich pastures, its massive oak forests, and its strong, well-fed livestock.
It was prime real estate.
It was. Gilead was globally renowned for its spices, its medicinal balms, and its immense agricultural wealth. Furthermore, major international trade routes, like the King's Highway, ran through these territories. Losing the Transjordan was an absolute economic catastrophe. It crippled Israel's wealth.
And militarily, it removes their buffer zone, right?
Exactly. The Transjordan was Israel's shield against the expanding Aramean and Assyrian empires. By losing Gilead and Bashan, the enemy is now right on the banks of the Jordan River, staring directly into the heartland of Israel.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we aren't just taking the biblical narrator's word for this. This isn't just a theological claim. It is corroborated by hard secular archaeology.
It absolutely is.
We have monuments pulled out of the dirt that confirm this massive regional upheaval.
We do, and they are some of the most spectacular finds in biblical archaeology. First, there is the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III, who was an Assyrian king.
Right, discovered in Nimrud. It literally depicts a figure bowing, face down in the dirt, paying tribute to the Assyrian king. And the cuneiform inscription identifies him as Jehu, son of Omri.
Which is fascinating because Jehu actually wiped out the house of Omri, but the Assyrians just knew it as the Omride kingdom.
Right.
The obelisk shows Jehu paying massive amounts of silver and gold as protection money. Why? Because Hazael is beating him so badly that Jehu has to beg the Assyrian superpower for help.
And then there is the Tel Dan stele. This is a shattered, inscribed stone found in northern Israel. It was likely commissioned by Hazael himself.
Yeah.
It's an Aramaic victory monument where the Aramean king boasts about crushing the king of Israel. And crucially, it explicitly mentions defeating the house of David. It is one of the earliest extra-biblical references to King David.
The stones cry out. The dirt literally confirms the biblical text. Hazael shattered Israel's borders exactly as the text describes.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a timeless principle playing out in real time. Spiritual compromise inevitably leads to real-world vulnerability.
Unquestionably.
Jehu secured his throne domestically by playing politics with the golden calves, but in doing so, he left his nation spiritually hollow and militarily defenseless. God removed his protective hedge, and the borders immediately collapsed. Jehu eventually dies. After a 28-year reign, he's buried in Samaria, but he leaves behind a shrinking, bleeding, highly vulnerable nation.
It is a profoundly tragic legacy. He won the throne but lost the nation.
I want to shift our focus for a moment because we spent a lot of time talking about geopolitics, chariots, assassinations, and trade routes.
Sure.
But as anyone who studies biblical literature knows, there's an entire unseen realm operating behind the physical text. We are reading about swords and shields, but there is a massive cosmic spiritual conflict happening here, isn't there?
Absolutely. The Apostle Paul writes in the New Testament book of Ephesians that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Oh, yeah.
When we read 2 Kings 10, we have to look behind the curtain. Baal wasn't just a cultural trend, and he wasn't just a piece of carved stone. The biblical worldview asserts that behind these pagan idols are actual demonic entities.
Right.
The Principality of Baal had established deep territorial control over the northern kingdom through decades of blood sacrifice, sexual ritual, and the systematic murder of God's prophets under Jezebel.
So when Jehu's soldiers are hacking down the Asherah poles, smashing the pillars of Baal, and physically tearing that temple apart, they aren't just doing demolition work.
No, not at all.
That is a direct, violent strike against dark spiritual forces. It is an eviction notice served in the heavenly realms.
Exactly. The Principality of Baal was violently dethroned in Israel. That stronghold was broken, but, and this is a crucial, terrifying but, did the demonic forces actually lose the war for Israel's soul that day?
I mean, they lost their main temple and all their priests, so yes.
No. They simply executed a strategic retreat.
Wait, explain that. How is losing your entire religious infrastructure a retreat?
Because Satan is perfectly content with religious compromise if he cannot have open apostasy.
Oh, wow.
The enemy lost the explicit, horrific temple of Baal. But where did he retreat to? He retreated to the stronghold of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan.
So by keeping the calves.
Because Jehu left those calves intact out of political fear, he left a demonic foothold right inside the borders of his own nation. He left an alternative, unauthorized worship system that still violated God's law.
And that foothold would fester.
It would act as a spiritual slow poison for another 100 years, until it eventually led to the total, catastrophic Assyrian exile of the entire northern kingdom. The enemy realized he didn't need the overt horror of Baal to destroy Israel. He just needed Jehu to tolerate the subtle compromise of the calves.
That is terrifying. It really frames the story differently. It's not just about a king making a bad policy choice. It's about leaving the back door open to a spiritual adversary.
It absolutely is.
And it also shows how this chapter doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is deeply woven into the entire tapestry of Scripture. Let's trace some of those threads, because 2 Kings 10 connects backward and forward in the Bible in some incredible ways.
The primary backward connection, as we've noted, is fulfillment. Everything Jehu does in the first half of the chapter is the exact, literal fulfillment of the prophecy Elijah delivered back in 1 Kings 21.
The Naboth's vineyard incident.
Yes. When Ahab stole Naboth's vineyard, Elijah told him that the dogs would lick his blood and that his entire line would be cut off. Jehu's actions prove that God's word, whether it promises immense blessing or terrifying judgment, is absolute. It does not fail. The timeline may stretch, but the word is certain.
And the language used around the golden calves is a massive echo. When Jeroboam built the calves, he said, "Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." That is nearly a verbatim quote of what Aaron said when he built the infamous golden calf at Mount Sinai in Exodus 32.
Exactly.
It's the exact same sin echoing through centuries. The human heart keeps making the same mistakes.
And looking forward, we have to look at how the prophets viewed Jehu later on, specifically the prophet Hosea. In Hosea chapter 1, verse 4, God makes a startling declaration. He says he will eventually avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu.
Hang on, I need you to clarify that, because this feels like a contradiction. God explicitly commissioned Jehu to wipe out Ahab's house at Jezreel.
True.
God actually commended him for doing it and rewarded him with the dynasty. Why is God, a century later, going to punish Jehu's descendants for the blood of Jezreel?
It is a brilliant, vital, theological nuance. God commanded the judgment, yes. The house of Ahab had to be removed. But Jehu executed that judgment with excessive, unsanctioned violence, unchecked political ambition, and a deeply self-serving heart.
Oh, like the Judean princess.
Exactly. He killed the Judean princess, he used profound deceit, and he stubbornly refused to submit to God's law regarding the calves. Hosea reveals that God judges not just the action we take, but the heart and the motive behind the action.
That makes a lot of sense.
Jehu used God's divine command as a convenient cloak for his own violent political ambition. He did the right thing, but he did it for entirely the wrong reasons.
So in theological terms, Jehu serves as a type, doesn't he? He is the ultimate archetype of the false reformer. He's someone who acts like a savior, who violently cleans up the outward systems, who looks incredibly fiercely zealous, but who entirely lacks the inward heart transformation that God actually requires.
Exactly. He is a warning beacon to every generation that zeal without wholehearted obedience is incredibly dangerous. Action without a surrendered heart is just ambition in disguise.
So what does this all mean for us? Because we've covered massive ground today. We've talked about ancient harems, Assyrian monuments, demonic principalities, and agricultural cults. But I want to bring this deep dive directly to you, the listener.
Yeah, let's bring it home.
How does a violent, blood-soaked story of a geopolitical coup from 841 BC relate to your life, your family, or our modern culture today?
It relates profoundly because the Jehu pattern is alive and well right now. Human nature hasn't changed since the Iron Age. As individuals, we are often incredibly zealous when it comes to destroying our own personal Baals.
What do you mean by our personal Baals?
The gross, socially unacceptable sins, the things that ruin our reputations or our health. We get sober, we quit the obvious destructive addictions, we clean up the outward behaviors that threaten our careers or our marriages. We are very happy to smash those temples because doing so actually benefits us. It makes us look better to society.
But we fiercely protect our golden calves.
Precisely. We protect the comfortable, respectable sins, the things that give us a false sense of security or control. We hold on to deep-seated pride. We maintain hyper-independence and refuse to submit to authority. We cling to materialism, to careerism, to bitterness.
Right.
We say, look, God, I destroyed the really bad stuff. I cleaned up the Baal in my life. Let me keep this comfortable little compromise. Let me keep this calf because it makes me feel safe. But the biblical reality is that God does not negotiate treaties with our idols. He doesn't want a timeshare in our hearts. He demands the throne.
And we see this Jehu pattern play out nationally and culturally, too. And I want to be clear, as we look at this, we're looking at it impartially, examining human sociology, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. Cultures do this all the time.
They really do.
A society might launch a massive, zealous reform to abolish an obvious, horrific, historical, evil like abolishing slavery, or reforming brutal child labor laws. They destroy the obvious Baals of their era. But while the society changes the outward laws and congratulates itself, it often retains deep-seated systemic calves. We might hold on to hyper-materialism or radical exclusionary nationalism or extreme individualism that fractures communities or ideologies that completely subvert human dignity in other more subtle ways. We change the outward systems, we build monuments to our progress, but the inward spiritual corruption of the human heart remains exactly the same. We just built a different idol that better suits our current political needs.
That is the tragedy of external reform without internal renewal. It changes the scenery, but it doesn't change the soul. And for the believer in Jesus Christ listening to this, 2 Kings 10 offers both a severe, sobering warning and an incredibly profound encouragement.
Okay, let's hear it.
The warning is stark. God does not grade on a curve. Partial obedience obeying God only when it aligns with our political, financial, or personal preferences, but rebelling when it costs us something is still disobedience.
That's tough to hear.
It is. Jehu kept the calves because they protected his kingdom. We have to ask ourselves, what are we protecting that actually belongs on the altar? Believers are called to a complete renewal of the mind, as the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 12. Not just behavior modification, not just smashing the outward Baals, but a total inward, uncompromising surrender of the will.
It's a heavy warning, but you mentioned encouragement. Where is the hope in a chapter this dark?
The hope is found in the absolute, terrifying, beautiful faithfulness of God's word. Look at the text. Every single word God spoke through Elijah regarding the judgment of Ahab came to pass perfectly. The timeline was long, the methods were complex, but the word did not fail.
It was certain.
Very certain. God is sovereign over history. He is sovereign over arrogant kings, over massive armies, over geopolitics, and over the dark spiritual forces of this world. If God was that meticulously faithful to execute his justice and keep his word in the violent days of Jehu, he is infinitely, perfectly faithful to fulfill every single promise of grace he has made to us in Jesus Christ.
Amen to that.
The enemy's strongholds will ultimately fall. The compromises will be dealt with. His promises of redemption, forgiveness, and ultimate victory are as certain as the rising sun. We don't have to rely on the flawed zeal of a Jehu. We have the perfect obedience of Christ.
Okay, let's wrap this up. In this deep dive, we've watched King Jehu's furious, calculated, blood-soaked rise to power. We've analyzed the brilliant, brutal psychological tactics that brought down a 90-year dynasty without a siege.
It's been quite a ride.
It really has. We've witnessed the stunning deception that eradicated the horrific cult of Baal from Israel, and we've mourned his tragic, failed compromise with the golden calves, a political calculation that left his borders exposed, his nation pruned by enemies, and his legacy tarnished by half-hearted obedience.
It is a sweeping, complex narrative that forces us to look in the mirror. It strips away our excuses and forces us to examine the actual anatomy of our own obedience.
Which brings me back to the thought we started with. We often expect reading history or ancient texts to be like looking at a clean clinical X-ray, showing us exactly where the bone is broken in black and white. But Jehu's story shows us that the human heart is a landscape of muddy, turbulent waters.
Yes.
It shows us the terrifying reality that you can be a highly effective sword in the hand of God, yet still have a heart made of impenetrable stone.
That's the real warning.
So I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder long after this audio stops playing. Take a hard, honest look at the landscape of your own life. Are you truly fighting God's battles for His glory with a totally surrendered and renewed heart? Or are you just using His name and a display of religious zeal to protect the golden calves in your own little kingdom? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep digging into the text, keep questioning your own motives, and we'll see you next time.